Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Meredith. I make videos on slow living and motherhood here on YouTube, and then I also have my own fitness app that's called The Playground that's all about bringing the joy back into movement. Today is going to be a little bit different, a little bit more casual. It's a cozy, rainy day, and I just decided it's time. It is time for me to share the story of our breastfeeding journey. To be honest, it's still a bit of an open chapter. Things are constantly evolving as my daughter grows, but she is approaching the 1-year mark, which is crazy. And I figure if nothing else, it's time for me to document this just so that I can remember it and I can look back on it. But I'm also just really hopeful that this can be a helpful resource to other moms out there who might be going through something similar. So the headline of our experience is I have a massive oversupply as well as an overactive letdown. A lot of people who hear that immediately react by saying, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. But as all of the specialists that I've seen throughout this journey have said, it is a blessing and a curse. I'm gonna break this video up into 3 parts. I'm first just gonna tell the story of what happened to us in chronological order because I do think it's a really valuable story to hear. It's more of a cautionary tale, if you will. Then I'm just gonna share a handful of tips that I've learned along the way, like practical tips that you can use to help manage an oversupply. And then lastly, I'm gonna just kind of open up about the emotional side of having an oversupply. Throughout this journey, I have read so many books, I've read tons of articles and encountered lots of resources, seen lots of specialists, and all of that has been really helpful from a logistical, practical perspective. But what I feel that I have lacked throughout this entire experience is village, is community, is other women who are going through it. Hearing other women talk about it, of course, doesn't make it easier, but just the feeling that I am not alone, I feel would have made a huge difference. And I remember when I was like 3 weeks postpartum typing into YouTube multiple different times, women experiencing an oversupply. And I really didn't find anyone talking about it. So here I am. I'm gonna talk about it, starting with our personal story. So I got pregnant, and then around 23 weeks into my pregnancy, I started leaking colostrum at night. Just little bits here and there, just like 1 or 2 droplets. And then it started to pick up more and more as my pregnancy went on. I think it was probably around 32 weeks where it was enough each night that I started sleeping on a towel because I was leaking so much colostrum. And I just wanna say for anyone who's pregnant, as far as I understand it, the amount of colostrum that you produce during pregnancy doesn't necessarily have a direct impact on how robust or not robust your milk supply is going to be once your baby is here. I'm mainly just sharing this because it's a part of my experience. It's part of what happened. Leaked a lot of colostrum throughout pregnancy. Then my daughter was born at 39 weeks and 2 days. We were able to have the golden hour, which was really lovely, and she latched on within that hour, and it seemed to be going really well. I mean, of course, I felt very clumsy with breastfeeding. It was a brand new skill, and it's really hard and challenging to figure out how to hold your newborn baby and breastfeed. But the nurse there said the latch looked great. Probably 15 hours after my daughter was born, there was a lactation consultant that worked at the hospital. She came in, we joke about it now, but she came in and was like, wow, your colostrum is amazing. And of course, all you ever hear about is people having a low supply. You never hear about people having an oversupply. So I was so excited in that moment thinking, yes, I'm gonna have a great supply. Little did I know. My milk actually came in on day 3. By day 5, things felt off. A through line of our story is that we're first-time parents, so we just didn't always know, is this normal or is this weird? Is this a red flag? I remember feeling at that time, this feels a little extreme. She was just constantly crying, non-stop crying. It was clear that she was hungry, but whenever I would try to take her to the breast, she would scream even more. She wanted nothing to do with it. So we scheduled an appointment with a lactation consultant. And at this point on day 10, I felt very confident that I did in fact have an oversupply. Of course, again, it's my first time. I don't know what other people's experiences are, but the amount of milk that was coming out of my body felt incredibly extreme. So we went to this appointment, and this woman firstly was pretty harsh and rough. When she saw me feeding my daughter, she immediately was just like, I'm not liking what I'm seeing. You need to fix this. You need to fix that. We got to do this. So that was very off-putting to me. But then what was even more challenging is when I tried to bring up my concerns about an oversupply, she pretty much just shut me down. She said, it's really rare for people to have an oversupply. It's way too early to know if you actually do have an oversupply. And even if you do, we need to wait until your supply actually regulates to know for sure. Because if you start trying to do things for an oversupply right now, you're putting your supply at risk and you might lose your milk altogether. I just want to pause right here and say that yes, there is certainly some truth to what she's saying. You don't want to be doing a bunch of things, especially 10 days into your baby's life, to jeopardize your milk supply. But first of all, the delivery. If you are someone watching this who regularly works with women in the early postpartum period, please be gentle. We are so fragile. Everything is new. Our hormones are all over the place. We've just went through the biggest experience of our life. We feel raw. We feel vulnerable. We have this brand new human being that we're trying to take care of, and we're getting no sleep. And for me to come to someone and say, I'm having my first bit of intuition as a brand new mom, and for that to just completely be shut down, I feel sad for my past self. I just had to say that first. To the point, yes, we do not want to be doing things to jeopardize our supply, especially when your baby is only 10 days old. But there are still things that you can do to help you manage an oversupply. Manage it for you as mom, and definitely manage it for your brand new baby. And I'm going to share some of those tools that you can use to manage the oversupply when I get to the tips section. But the blanket statement that there's nothing for you to do except to wait it out is not only completely unhelpful, but I actually really feel at this point is unethical. I will give her the benefit of the doubt that maybe she just didn't know some of these things, but at least be kind with your words. So I always remember that it was on that same night after we'd seen the lactation consultant that it became abundantly clear that my daughter had a lot of gas. She was just kicking in her sleep nonstop. She was grunting all of the time. And then she was also doing it while she was awake. It was pretty much 24 hours out of the day. She was grunting, kicking, seeming like she needed to fart or poop and wasn't able to. She never really spit up a lot. It was always more GI trying to get poop or gas out and not being effective with that. And then in addition, just constantly crying. So over the course of the next month, we saw a lot of different people about these things. To be honest, we mostly went the free route. We saw a lactation consultant through the hospital. We saw a nurse practitioner that was free through the hospital. We actually went and scheduled an appointment with the pediatrician, and we just kept getting the same message, which was, sorry, this is just how babies are sometimes. You have a colicky baby and it's tough to watch, but you have to deal with it and she'll grow out of it eventually. Now I'll pause in the story to express how much I hate the word colic. It is just a lazy diagnosis. As far as I have learned and experienced, and I'm curious, any of you out there who have been told you have a colicky baby, babies don't just cry for no reason. They're trying to communicate something. They're trying to tell us something. And yes, I know that when you're a brand new baby and you don't have a mature digestive tract, it can be a little challenging. This was extreme. It was 24 hours of discomfort, 24 hours of nonstop crying, kicking, grunting, even in her sleep. And at the end of the day, there was an issue. We did finally figure out what was going on, but it feels unethical to me for people who are working with brand new parents to just be saying, this is what it is. Get used to it. At 5.5 weeks postpartum, we saw a lactation consultant who was the first person to validate that I had an oversupply. She saw one breastfeeding session. I mean, within the first 30 seconds, she was like, oh my gosh, yes, you have an oversupply. I can't believe you haven't been doing anything about this, and you're 5.5 weeks postpartum. So let me talk a little bit about what an oversupply looks like at this point, because I feel like it might be helpful. When I start to have a letdown, milk will spray out of my nipples. Like, I'm talking shoot out 3 feet in front of me, both from the side that my daughter's feeding off of and the other side. I understand that if you've never seen this, it can be really confusing and hard to visualize. So to be clear, It's not like a water faucet is turning on and that level of milk is shooting out. We have these smaller glands that are called Montgomery glands. Actually, I should pause to say that some specialist at some point told me about these Montgomery glands. I've never actually researched it any further to confirm that this is true, but this is just what someone told me and I'm sticking with it. We have Montgomery glands that are much smaller. So whenever I'm having a letdown, it's the Montgomery glands that are spraying, and I'll have like 3 to 5 different tiny shoots. It's almost like it's coming out of a little water gun, you know, like little tiny things, but they're spraying really far. And then in addition to those sprays that are going out way out in front of me, I have more of that like thick droplets of milk, leaky water faucet just going straight down with gravity as well. So it's dripping down and shooting out in front of me. It's always been like this. Unfortunately, it is still like this to this day, which I know if you're 10 days postpartum, you're like, are you kidding? I will get more into that. So yeah, I had an oversupply, and this woman at 5.5 weeks verified that for me. At my 6-week follow-up appointment, my midwife suggested that we go to see a craniosacral therapist for my daughter because the gas was just still so bad and the crying was just still so bad and she was still just so uncomfortable. And we knew at this point that it was because of how fast the milk was coming out, but like I had not learned how to help manage that. This is so horrible to say, but I always just say I basically was just like waterboarding my baby, and I would try to take it away and then give it back. But like when you have a newborn baby who's crying and screaming for milk, it's really hard to get them to latch on, to cause the letdown to happen, and then take it away from them and then give it back to them. If you know, you know. It's tough. So we scheduled an appointment with the craniosacral therapist that my midwife had suggested, but she was not available for a whole nother month. So basically until 10 weeks, when we were finally able to see this craniosacral therapist, we were just surviving, and it was hell. The one other thing I'll throw in here is that my daughter was gonna be starting daycare at 3 months, and so we knew she needed to take a bottle by the time we reached the 3-month mark. We started to try to introduce a bottle around 5 weeks, and she wasn't taking it. This was no big deal at the time because we thought, oh my gosh, we have so much time. We continued to try every single day. I would just pump and then give her the bottle, and she would not take it. She would not take it. We're doing all sorts of research on how to get babies to take bottles, and just nothing is working. And we were starting to get a little overwhelmed about this. Finally, we go in to see this craniosacral therapist. She quite literally saved our lives. We went in to go see her. Before I even took my daughter out of her car seat, she said, "This baby is in protection mode. Look at her. She is so tense." It makes me so sad now because, as I've shared, I have a fitness app. I have so much training and education and experience in this world of body work, and I've worked with humans my entire adult life, and I wasn't able to see it in my own daughter. But again, as I said, we're first-time parents, we don't know, and I was at the end of my rope. Like, I just was not able to take in new information. So now when I look back at photos, she was like this, and she just lived in a constant state of fight or flight. Through a very short, quick evaluation, our craniosacral therapist was able to identify that she has completely lost her ability to suck because whenever the milk is coming at her and I'm breastfeeding her, she's trained herself to use her tongue to slow down the flow of milk. So she was tongue thrusting, like basically trying to put her tongue up as a barrier. So that's why she couldn't take a bottle. She didn't know how to suck. She made it abundantly clear, in the kindest way possible, she was always so nice, that we were in a state of emergency. My baby was no longer able to suck. The sucking reflex integrates at 8 weeks. My daughter is now 10 weeks old, so that reflex is gone. And because she's no longer sucking, my breasts are not receiving the stimulus that they need to produce milk. So while I still have an oversupply, that might be going downhill very quickly because she's no longer sucking. She said there's a term for this. It's called babies who are living off of the letdown. So basically the letdown comes, it's really hard and fast. Babies just drink that and then they no longer suck. So my daughter was living off of the letdown. So it was way more dire than just the fact that she wasn't taking a bottle. In addition, she looked at her poop and said, "Oh my goodness, this poop is very messed up." Again, I wish I had been able to identify that myself, but I wasn't. It was very green and very mucousy. So all of that gas and colic that my daughter is experiencing is truly having an effect on her digestive system. It's not just that she wasn't able to poop. The poop tells a message. So there are many reasons why babies whose moms have oversupplies or an overactive letdown are so gassy. One is that, as I said, they're kind of being waterboarded. And so just that like really fast gulping and swallowing and kind of like choking, sometimes she used to cough a lot. That alone can just put bubbles in the belly. But then secondly, we have foremilk and we have hind milk. So the foremilk is the first bit of milk that babies get. The hind milk is where all the nutritious fat is. So ideally, babies are getting both of those types of milk together in one feed. But when you have a baby who's drinking out of an oversupply, that baby might only get the foremilk and then become full and never actually get to the hind milk. And so without that hind milk, it can really be rough on their digestive systems. They're not getting any fat. So her poop was very revealing in part of the story. And then the third thing that she said was, this baby is just so stressed and tense and in protection mode. We really need to do a lot of body work on her to help her nervous system calm back down as well, because that is a puzzle piece here. So the number one priority at this point was to book an appointment with an oral function specialist so that that specialist could be working specifically with my daughter's mouth and her motor skills and helping her regain the ability to suck and take a bottle and make sure that my supply is still going. And then with this craniosacral therapist, we were going to work on all of the body stuff and just trying to help relieve some of this tension that she had going on. Booked an appointment. It was 1 week from the day that we saw this craniosacral therapist, and within that week, my milk supply regulated, meaning my body was no longer receiving the stimulus that my daughter needed, milk, so it stopped producing milk. We went from 3 to 4 minute feeds, because that's how quickly she would get what she needed from the letdown, to all of a sudden she's feeding 30 minutes on the right, straight into 30 minutes on the left, back and forth all day, not getting the calories she needs because my body wasn't producing the milk and she didn't know how to ask for it. And we had this appointment booked, but she was basically starting to starve. Overnight, I went from the mom who has a massive oversupply and is causing a bunch of issues in her child because of it, to the mom who is not able to produce enough milk to satiate her child. And the worst of all was that she didn't know how to take a bottle. So it's not like at this point we could turn to formula. It literally felt like there was no way out. There were no options. We had no idea what to do. But thankfully, we were able to go in to see this oral function therapist in the nick of time. And she was very straightforward with us. Once again, an incredibly kind woman and just so proactive and helpful. She said, we have a lot of things going on right here. We have a lot of things that need to be addressed. But the number one thing that we have to do, the top priority, is to get your daughter to take a bottle. Because if she can take a bottle, then all of us can take an exhale, and then we can address some of the root causes, but we got to make sure that she's getting her calories. So what we did in that session was just audition like 15 different bottles, and we found a bottle that is really one of the worst bottles on the market. And this woman emphasized that. She said, if a lactation consultant saw that I was advising you to use this bottle, they would be so disappointed, but we got to get her on a bottle. And it was basically one where she was like biting the nipple, and when she would bite it, the milk would come out. We had that bottle. This woman let us borrow her really terrible bottle. And she said, for the next week, we're going to treat this like a 9 to 5. From the hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., you are just going to work to get her to take this bottle and get milk out of the bottle. And then once 5 p.m. rolls around, you can go back to breastfeeding her, which also felt like a 9 to 5, to be honest, because she didn't know how to breastfeed either. So the next day, I called it Bottle Bootcamp. We did exactly what she said. We went from being the family who just like didn't track any feed at all to now all of a sudden I am tracking every single ounce that I'm pumping. I'm tracking every single ounce that she takes from the bottle. The whole day was dedicated towards this. We would spend an hour and a half to 2 hours trying to get her to take 2 ounces, and then she would take a nap, and then she would wake back up, and that whole next wake window we would be working to get the milk down. And you know, I was trying to calm her down. We'd go outside. We had all these different exercises that we'd been assigned, both body exercises from the craniosacral therapist and now a couple of mouth exercises from the oral function specialist. And we were just trying to stay calm, but also get her to take this bottle. Shockingly, by the end of the first day, she really was able to take that bottle. So then the next day, I used more of a transitional bottle. It's not as bad as the first bottle I was using, but it's also not the gold standard of bottle bottle that you want to be using. And we worked on that transition bottle all day, and she got it so much quicker. By the end of day 3, she was really taking a bottle. And so I, on day 4, decided to use the gold standard, which as far as I understand it is the pigeon. The pigeon bottle is the gold standard, and she took it. So ever since then, it was just 4 days of bottle boot camp. She has been very successfully taking bottles, which is great. It gave us all a moment to just exhale and say, okay, we know that she is getting calories. So for the next couple of weeks, we saw these women every week, and I continued to do a lot of bodywork exercises on my daughter 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a day. It was a full-time job, but we were seeing a lot of progress really quickly. She just so clearly was like relaxing into her body. Her gas was getting a little bit better. And the other thing that we were doing was exclusively bottle feeding, because we just decided to eliminate the breastfeeding for a moment so we could really get her back to a baseline. And I was just pumping to keep up my supply, and then we would give her the milk that I was pumping. After about 2 weeks of exclusive bottle feeding, we reintroduced breastfeeding, but just at night via dream feeds, because she was really good at breastfeeding while she was asleep, and we co-sleep. So we would just do a little side-lying dream feed throughout the night, and those were going beautifully. After another month of exclusively bottle feeding during the day and breastfeeding only at night, and really diligently doing all of this body work, we decided to try to reintroduce breastfeeding. But within 48 hours, the intense gas came back. Her poop was green again, and it was really disheartening, because at this point she was 4 months old, and I had done so much work. I know that people might from the outside see like, why were you doing all this? Like, why did you care so much? And I can't express it. I just really had a goal and a dream of breastfeeding my daughter. And I was doing all this work thinking that we were going to get to a place where my supply actually was going to be regulated and that it would be a source of comfort for her. But so quickly at this point, it was clear that all of it was still an issue. So at this point, she was 19 weeks old, and we decided to revisit the conversation around a potential tongue tie release. Now, I want to say, everybody's got a different opinion on this. This is my experience. It's done. Please don't comment on it. I don't want to hear your opinion on it. This is just what we did, and I don't regret it at all. Early on, when we first started seeing these women, both of them did an assessment on my daughter and said she has a tie. But both felt very strongly that we should not get it revised, because there was so much dysfunction that she would be left completely discombobulated. And they both have had experiences of babies getting a tie released when they weren't prepared for it physically and needing to be sent to the hospital because they didn't know how to use their mouth, and their mouth just became so dysregulated. They both said, we're gonna do every single thing that we can to really build up her motor control, her motor skills in her mouth, relax her body and her nervous system, and then if we're still seeing issues, then we can revisit the conversation, but she might not need it. So we were now at that point. We'd gone through everything, we'd done everything that we could, and there was still just the green poop. And you know, even when she was on the bottles, her gas was better, but she was still gassy and a little uncomfortable. So I don't want to just say like she was perfect on bottles and not at all with breastfeeding. It was more nuanced than that. They both recommended the same woman for us to go see. They'd worked with this woman for many years and emphasized that she is quite conservative. So if she evaluates my daughter and recommends that we get a tie released, then they trust that. And I trusted them. So at 19 weeks and 6 days, we went to go get evaluated by this woman. And it's funny, I remember when I was at the office, you know, you have to fill out the forms at the doctor's office and they say, check all the symptoms that apply. And there's like 20 different boxes of symptoms. I checked off 16 of the 20 boxes. And I literally took a photo of it because it was that funny. I mean, all of the signs of a tie were present in my daughter, and things that we had been through and were still going through. So I pretty much knew before we even went in to go see her that she was going to suggest that we have the tie released. She saw us and recommended that we had both the tongue and lip released. And so we did on that day. And I don't want to dive too deep into this, but I just want to say, I have heard so many women say, And then we got the tongue tie revision done and all was well. And everyone just talks about it so casually, and it was anything but casual for me. Apparently it's a lot harder as your baby gets older. And my daughter was close to 5 months old at this point, and so it was really tough. There was a lot of blood and she was just more aware. But immediately after it was done, she latched on, and it was a beautiful latch. And then later that night she fell asleep and she was just so relaxed and open across the front of her neck, which we'd worked so hard on and never fully accomplished. And then a week and a half after the releases were done, I went in for an appointment with each of our 2 specialists on the same day, and we breastfed for the first time while my daughter was awake in front of each of them, and they both said, this is it. We've reached it. We've reached the goal. This is a beautiful latch. There's no clicking. There's no mouth sounds. Her body is super relaxed. We made it. For the next month or so from 5 months to 6 months, it was a little bit rocky, but it was rocky in the way that you imagine a breastfeeding relationship to be. It was like we were starting from scratch. We were just trying to learn each other and our positioning and figuring out our timing and things like that. But by the time she turned 6 months old, we had really established a beautiful breastfeeding relationship. And that pretty much leads us to today. She is now 11 months old, and we continue to have a beautiful breastfeeding relationship, and I just feel so grateful that we stuck it out. Okay, so let me share some practical tips with you. Again, I'm not certified, I'm not licensed, but as you can tell, I saw a lot of specialists and I gained a lot of insights along the way. So this is just like mom to mom casual chat. This is what worked for me. Firstly, if you have an oversupply, the milkshake is going to be one of your best friends. So I explained the foremilk, hindmilk situation where we've got the foremilk up at the front and the hindmilk that's full of fat in the back. And just like a bottle, your breast can be shaken up, and that sort of mixes the foremilk and the hindmilk together, making it so that your hindmilk can come out more easily, more quickly, and your baby might get to it more effectively and efficiently. So the milkshake is you literally take your breast and you shake it for 30 to 60 seconds like you're shaking a bottle to stir all of that up. I really do feel that that does have a huge effect on managing my daughter's gas. And again, it's not going to affect my supply. The supply is still gonna be there. I'm just mixing it all up together. So that is number one. You can do that as early as makes sense for you. Secondly is the laid back position, which is essentially where you lie back onto a chair, onto a couch. And this is really great for an oversupply or an overactive letdown because gravity is working with you. So I actually do still shoot milk up even when I'm in the laid back position, but it is so much less extreme because it's working against gravity. My daughter and I did this so much when she was much smaller. It's not really something we do anymore, but it really helped us a lot in the early days for sure. My next tip is if you have a Haakaa, throw it away. A Haakaa does not belong in the home of someone who has an oversupply. I was using the Haakaa constantly early on because as my daughter was feeding on one breast, I was leaking out of the other, and I was thinking, oh, I need to save this or catch this. A couple things here. The Haakaa is a suction, so it's suctioning onto my other breast, encouraging more milk to flow. And I'm really curious where my supply would have been at had I not been using the Haakaa for the first 5 weeks. And you know, I told you that we saw a lot of people early on in those first 5 weeks and no one took us seriously. And I asked about the Haakaa with everyone and they said, oh yeah, that's not a big deal. And then finally around 6 weeks, the first lactation consultant who knew what she was talking about was like, oh my gosh, no, do not be using that. That is stimulus to your body. I really had this complex early on around wasting milk. I didn't want to waste any milk, but I think if you are someone with an oversupply, as a gift to yourself and your own mental health, just let that go. It's okay. There is going to be so much milk that comes out of your body that you're not going to save because that's the nature of your body and what's going on. Just let it go. Don't worry about it. I finally just started relying more on breast pads, and I mean, I would go through 20 breast pads a day. It was ridiculous, but just let it drain into a breast pad and then wash the breast pad or throw the breast pad away or whatever. The Haakaa is only going to stimulate you further. You could also catch it into a cup if you really want, but to be honest, That was way too much for me when I got a baby on one breast and then I'm trying to catch milk out of the other. No, it's too much. Now, my last 2 tips fall under the category of things you might want to wait for because they could potentially have an effect on your supply. So if you're 10 days postpartum, I would wait, but I started both these things around 6 weeks postpartum and I found that they did really help. The first of which is block feeding. So block feeding is where you feed for multiple times in a row on one side. And what's really nice about this is it trains the other breast that it doesn't need to produce as much. So I would usually feed from 6 a.m. to noon on one side, and then from noon to 6 on the other, and then from 6 to midnight on the first, and then from midnight to around 6 a.m. on the second. And I just went in 4 chunk blocks like this all throughout the day, and it really, I feel like I started to feel a change around that time when I started block feeding. The flip side to that is that the breast that you are feeding off of is gonna have a lot of milk in it, but if you are really managing that with the milkshake and the laid back feeding, and if it's possible, take your baby off of your breast while the letdown is happening, then it can be pretty manageable. I found that it made a huge difference, like just within a couple of days. So I would definitely give that a try. And then the last thing is mint and sage tea. To be honest, I didn't really feel that these had an effect, but supposedly mint can take down your supply a little bit. Sage is supposed to really have a big effect on your supply. I was drinking a lot of mint and sage tea and I didn't really feel it made a difference, but it might for you. But again, it's definitely one of those things, just wait a little bit for it because you don't want to have too big of an impact on your supply early on. Okay, and then lastly, I said I wanted to open up a little bit about the emotional side. I didn't plan out anything that I was gonna say here. I just kind of wanted to open the floor up and see what happens. I'm really trying to put myself back in the shoes of when I was really early postpartum and what it was that I wanted to hear and what I was feeling. It is tragic to watch your baby be uncomfortable. It's just tragic. It continues to be tragic. She falls and hurts herself all the time and it's the worst thing ever. And to see your baby crying over something that is supposed to bring them comfort and that you hear all other moms talking about brings their baby such comfort is really, really hard. My baby had never fallen asleep at the breast, and I feel like that's something you see and hear all of the time is the baby just gently falls asleep at the breast. It was never that because she was going to battle every time she breastfed. And I remember at the 6-week mark, after we'd seen the lactation consultant, she had given us the tips on laid back breastfeeding, on the milkshake and all of that stuff. For the first time when my daughter was 6 weeks old, she fell asleep while breastfeeding and I was an emotional wreck. I was just sobbing. I was like, this is what everybody else is experiencing. This is the best thing ever. I cannot believe I've been missing out on this. And the other thing that really needs to be acknowledged is just the physical discomfort of having an oversupply. You have milk all over you all of the time. And even in my one moment of having a little time to myself where my husband would take the baby was the shower, and the shower stimulates your breasts. At least for me, I was always spraying in the shower. And so it was just this constant reminder of this thing that I had going. Being 10 days postpartum and being told that I didn't actually have an oversupply, I just needed to wait until my supply regulated, and just looking everywhere, asking everyone, when does the milk supply regulate? And everywhere it said something different. Some places it said 4 weeks, some places it said 6 to 8, some it said 8 to 12. And I just remember thinking, how could I possibly make it that long? I could never make it that long. And at that point, I didn't realize what a problem it was for my daughter. I was just focused on myself. Like, I am so uncomfortable in this body. And if I were to know then what I know now, which is that I have an 11-month-old baby and my supply is pretty much as robust as ever, I don't know if I would have made it, to be honest. But let me tell you this. You can do this. You get used to it. And there are so many worse things out there that you could be going through than your oversupply. You just, quite honestly, get used to milk being all over you. There have been plenty of times where I've been kind of grateful for it. Like, I don't have to pump as long, which is nice. Everybody's body is different, so you might not still have an oversupply at the 11-month mark, but I do, and it's just a part of my story, and I really have come to accept it so much, and I have leaked through so many me shirts and I just couldn't care because it feeds my daughter, it nourishes my daughter, and you know what? At this point, she does love it. She does take such comfort in breastfeeding with me. Of course, there's a small part of me that hopes that maybe with baby number 2, I won't have quite as robust of a supply, but I have really fully come to terms with it. It's who I am. I got a lot of milk, baby, and it's okay. But I know how tough it can be when it's new and it's foreign and you've got so much going on and you have no sleep. I see you, I feel you, I wish I could hug you through the screen. You can do this, you will get through this. I really hope that this is of value to at least one person out there. If you're still here, thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to comment below if you have any questions. I'm happy to clarify further. Again, not certified, but mama to mama, I'm so happy to share any insights that I might have. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.